What would drive a man, a prince no less, to leave his own home in tears? To be caught on camera, his eyes glistening, shoulders slumping, as if the weight of the world had finally broken through the carefully curated public image? Picture this: the Montecito mansion, sprawling and pristine, almost painfully perfect in its Californian luxury. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and artfully placed fountains. But for one man, the perfect facade could not hide the storm within. And that man was Prince Harry. In the early evening, paparazzi, who had somehow anticipated his movements, snapped photos that would ripple across the globe within hours. There was no hiding, no staged smile, no practiced wave, just raw, unguarded emotion. But what had led him to this moment? And what did he mean when he whispered, "It's over"? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. To understand, we have to step back. Not too far, not too close, but just enough to see the patterns, the choices, the pressures, and the heartbreaks that brought a prince to tears. Every royal life is, by definition, a public performance. From the moment of birth, cameras and eyes and expectations are thrust upon you. Harry grew up under that unrelenting scrutiny, a young boy in the shadow of loss, of tragedy, of a legacy that demanded perfection at all costs. And yet, here he was, a man trying to carve out a private life, a normal life, only to be caught in the merciless glare of public fascination once again. The mansion itself seems almost like a metaphor. White pillars, sun-soaked terraces, gardens meticulously designed to impress. Yet behind those walls, according to sources close to the prince, there has been tension simmering for months. Unseen arguments, private decisions, and moments of vulnerability that never make the headlines. It's one thing to read the tabloid speculation. It's another to witness the cracks forming in real time. And what makes this story different, what makes it so magnetic right now, is that it's not just about royalty or fame. It's about heartbreak, human emotion, and the high stakes of personal decisions played out on a global stage. Imagine walking through the hallways of that mansion. Every corner echoes with memories. Laughter once shared, arguments carefully hushed, the ghost of past decisions lingering in the air. Those familiar with the scene describe a palpable tension, a quiet desperation that contrasts sharply with the manicured perfection visible from the outside. And on this evening, when the cameras captured Harry stepping out, tears brimming in his eyes, the mansion itself seemed to hold its breath. What could have caused this unraveling? Was it love? A decision? Or simply the cumulative weight of a life lived in the public eye, where every misstep is scrutinized and every emotion magnified? Let's talk about the people around him. Friends, aides, and confidants describe a man who has always carried burdens quietly, attempting to shield those he loves from his internal struggles. Yet even the strongest walls crack eventually. When he spoke those words, "It's over," it wasn't just a statement about a relationship or a fleeting moment. It was a culmination of years of pressure, of expectations, of loyalty tested and boundaries pushed. And while the media frenzy focused on the spectacle, very few paused to consider the depth of what was unfolding behind the lenses and headlines. Now, pause for a moment. Have you ever experienced a moment where you felt completely exposed, stripped of the armor you wear for the world? That's the kind of vulnerability Harry displayed that day. It's uncomfortable to witness, even from a distance, because it forces us to confront our own fears, our own heartbreaks, our own moments when the world seems too heavy to bear. And yet, there's a magnetic pull to this story. We watch, we analyze, we debate, not just because it involves royalty, but because it mirrors our own human experience, magnified through the lens of fame and expectation. Consider the irony. A man who spent years serving in the military, who has faced real danger, life and death situations abroad, finds himself overwhelmed by emotional peril at home. There's a poetic, almost tragic contrast here. We often measure resilience in physical courage, in visible heroism, but emotional courage, facing the collapse of relationships, the judgment of the public, the weight of legacy, is another battle entirely. And this, in many ways, is the battle that Harry was fighting as he walked down the driveway. Each step documented, each emotion scrutinized, each tier a headline waiting to explode. And then there's the question that everyone is asking. What exactly did he mean by "it's over"? Is it a relationship? A chapter of his life? A symbolic acknowledgement of the pressures that come with fame, family, and personal freedom? The truth is, no one outside those walls knows for certain. Yet, the ambiguity is part of what fuels the story. It's what keeps us watching, reading, clicking. The curiosity gap is enormous. And by the end of this video, we will peel back as many layers as possible, guided by sources, context, and the patterns that history often reveals about those in the royal spotlight. Let's also acknowledge the timing. The public has followed Harry's journey for decades. From a young boy haunted by the loss of his mother, to a soldier, to a husband, to a father, to a man attempting to define himself beyond the royal title. Every milestone has been celebrated, scrutinized, and politicized. And yet, nothing in the public record fully prepares us for the raw human moment of seeing him in tears, a man publicly vulnerable, a moment so intimate and so exposed that it reverberates worldwide. Why now? Why here? And what does this tell us about the price of living under the microscope of fame, even for those born into it? And so we begin. This is not a simple tale of celebrity gossip. It's a story about human emotion under pressure, about decisions that ripple far beyond the immediate, about a man navigating love, family, fame, and identity in real time. As we dive deeper, we'll explore the mansion, the people, the relationships, the conflicts, and the revelations that lead to that tearful moment. And just when you think you understand, a new twist emerges, challenging everything you thought you knew. The sun had begun its slow descent over Montecito, casting a golden glow across manicured lawns and the pristine white facade of the mansion. To the casual observer, everything looked perfect, calm, and serene. Yet behind the perfectly aligned hedges and the glass windows that reflected the fading sunlight, a storm was brewing, one no landscaping or luxury could contain. Prince Harry was about to step out into a world that watched his every move, and this time, there would be no mask, no composure, no rehearsed smile. Imagine being in his shoes. For years, the world has demanded a version of you. Polished, stoic, composed, untouchable. The expectations weigh like chains, each glance of the camera or whisper of a headline reinforcing them. And now, at this moment, he was breaking through those chains, revealing raw emotion that few had ever seen. Witnesses would later describe his expression as fragile, almost childlike in its vulnerability. Tears welled up in his eyes, a shimmer that caught the last rays of sunlight, a physical manifestation of inner turmoil. What had led to this moment, and what could possibly justify such an unguarded display from someone who had always maintained a carefully curated public image? The paparazzi were waiting. They had become experts at predicting his movements, anticipating where the prince might step into public view. Yet this moment was different. Usually, there was a game of control. Harry could pose, offer a small wave, even a polite nod. But today there was no pretense, no control. Each step down the driveway was deliberate but heavy, weighted with unspoken words and unshed emotions. The click of cameras punctuated each movement like the beats of a drum announcing an approaching storm. The flashes illuminated not just the mansion, but the raw human experience unfolding outside its walls. And then came the words. A whisper, barely audible to anyone not close enough, but caught in the audio by some reporters. It's over. 3 simple words, yet they carried the weight of years of emotion, frustration, love, and disappointment. Did he mean a relationship? Perhaps, but the ambiguity made it all the more compelling. Could it be about the pressures of fame, the expectations of family, or even the internal struggle to reconcile personal desires with public duty? Every possible interpretation only added layers to the curiosity gap, keeping the public riveted, their imaginations spinning. Let's pause to consider the mansion itself, not just as a physical space, but as a character in this unfolding drama. White pillars reach toward the sky, terraces bask in the Californian sunlight, fountains bubble serenely, yet none of this opulence could mask the human drama inside. Sources familiar with the household reported tension simmering like an unseen current beneath the surface. Arguments whispered in private rooms, decisions made behind closed doors, moments of vulnerability carefully hidden from view, all of it leading to this public unraveling. The mansion, in all its beauty, was silent witness to emotions that no luxury could soothe. Harry's body language was revealing. Shoulders slumped, gaze directed downward, lips pressed together as if to contain the storm inside. The casual observer might miss the subtle tremble in his hands, the hesitation in each step, but to those trained to read human emotion, it spoke volumes. There is a rawness here rarely seen in public figures, especially those trained to master every expression, every gesture. And yet, for all its fragility, there was a courage in that exposure, a defiance of expectations, a declaration that no facade could contain what he was feeling. And what of the people surrounding him? Friends, aides, and insiders had long spoken of Harry as a man who internalizes struggles, who protects those around him at the expense of his own well-being. Yet even the strongest walls eventually crack. The words, "It's over," were more than a statement. They were a release, a crack in the armor, a glimpse into a private reality that the public rarely sees. Sources who spoke after the incident suggested that Harry had been wrestling with this moment for months, perhaps years, trying to reconcile conflicting emotions, expectations, and desires. The paparazzi captured it all, of course, but the story was not in the images alone. The narrative unfolded in micro-expressions, the slight tremor in his voice, the fleeting hesitation in his step. Observers noted that it was not just sadness. There was a mixture of resignation, determination, and something almost defiant in the way he carried himself. The world saw tears, but the layers beneath those tears told a far more complex story, one of identity, pressure, love, and the profound challenge of maintaining personal integrity under relentless scrutiny. And yet, even as the world speculated, the most fascinating aspect was the ambiguity. "It's over" could mean many things, and the absence of immediate clarification only fueled the fire. Social media exploded, conversations buzzed in real time, and news outlets scrambled to provide context, analysis, and speculation. But speculation alone cannot capture the depth of human emotion displayed in that moment. This was not a scripted performance. It was an authentic human fracture, an unguarded revelation that pierced through the spectacle of fame. Let's consider for a moment the stakes. Public scrutiny is relentless, particularly for someone like Harry, whose life has been documented since birth. Every action, every decision, every emotion is magnified, dissected, and debated. The pressure is unimaginable. For many, emotional vulnerability is reserved for private spaces, shared only with trusted confidants. For Harry, there is no such refuge. A tear is instantly global news. A whisper becomes headline. A step down the driveway is analyzed frame by frame. And yet, he stepped anyway, revealing his humanity in the most unflinching way possible. The emotional resonance of this moment extends beyond celebrity fascination. It touches on universal human experiences, heartbreak, exposure, the tension between duty and desire. We all have moments when the world watches us, when our struggles are no longer private. Harry's tears resonate because they are authentic, because they reveal that even those seemingly insulated by privilege and status are not immune to the vulnerabilities of the human heart. And the drama is far from over. The exit from the mansion was only the opening act in a story layered with complexity, conflict, and revelation. Friends, family, and insiders hint at conversations that went far beyond what was captured on camera. Emotional decisions were being made in real time, and each one had consequences, both public and private. For every photograph, every headline, there is a story behind the lens, a deeper truth that few have access to but which will become critical as the narrative unfolds. As he moved further from the mansion, every step seemed heavier than the last. The driveway stretched out like a metaphorical path, leading him from one chapter of life to the next, each step marking a transition. Observers noted the mix of exhaustion and resolve, the simultaneous fragility and strength. Here was a man confronting the impossible, the collision of private pain with public spectacle, and doing so without pretense or performance. And just when it seemed the moment could not become more charged, insiders revealed something startling. Harry's words were not just for the cameras. They were intended for someone specific, a private admission turned semi-public by circumstance. The implications were enormous, rippling across relationships, reputations, and public perception. And yet, the full truth remained just out of reach, tantalizingly ambiguous, compelling everyone watching to wonder what would come next. The tearful exit was more than a personal moment. It was a statement, a prelude, an opening chapter in a story that would continue to unfold in ways no one could predict. It was raw, unfiltered, and deeply human, exposing the vulnerabilities of a man often portrayed as larger than life. And as he disappeared from view, the tension did not dissipate. It intensified, leaving a question hanging in the air. What exactly had led to this breakdown, and what would follow? The moment that captured the world's attention, the tearful exit from Montecito, was only part of the story. To truly understand why Prince Harry was seen in such a vulnerable state, we have to examine the relationships that shaped him, the bonds that supported him, and the pressures that threatened to unravel everything. Relationships, especially those played out in the public eye, are never simple. They are messy, complicated, and fraught with both devotion and expectation. And for Harry, one particular relationship had become the focal point of both personal joy and intense public scrutiny. For years, Prince Harry has lived under a microscope. Every smile, every glance, every handhold has been documented, dissected, and speculated upon. But behind the media frenzy and tabloid headlines lies a much more intimate story. The people closest to him, family, friends, confidants, have witnessed private moments of love, tension, joy, and heartbreak that the world could never fully comprehend. This is a story about those private moments, about the subtle complexities that escape public view. And it is within these intricacies that the tearful exit begins to make sense. At the center of this narrative is a relationship that, for all its public visibility, remained deeply personal in ways the media often failed to capture. Friends describe a bond built on trust, shared history, and mutual understanding. Yet, even the strongest relationships face challenges, and when one partner is a public figure with a global spotlight, those challenges are magnified. Decisions that would be private for most couples are dissected by millions. Moments of tension are amplified into speculation, and misunderstandings can become public spectacle almost instantaneously. Insiders report that in the months leading up to the Montecito incident, there were growing strains. Not all were visible, and not all were dramatic in the way tabloids suggest. Some were quiet, subtle disagreements, nuanced moments of misalignment between expectations and reality. Others were unavoidable confrontations, the kind that happen when two people navigate the pressures of life in extreme public view. And at the heart of these tensions was a constant balancing act. Between personal desire and public duty, between emotional honesty and the fear of exposure. The world saw Harry as a figure of fame, a prince who had stepped away from royal life to forge a new path. But those who knew him personally described someone deeply committed to partnership, someone willing to fight for love, yet aware of the fragility inherent in every relationship he forms. The irony is striking. The very attention that could protect him, wealth, status, influence, often became the force that threatened his private happiness. Let's not underestimate the emotional toll. Being in a relationship while constantly scrutinized is like living under glass. Every choice is observed, every decision analyzed. A simple disagreement can be twisted into a scandal. A private conversation can become public fodder. According to multiple sources, this relentless exposure began to wear on Harry. He became increasingly conscious of the gap between public perception and private reality, aware that even his most intimate moments could be weaponized, misinterpreted, or sensationalized. And yet, despite these pressures, there were moments of profound connection. Friends speak of evenings spent in quiet conversation, of laughter shared behind closed doors, of gestures of love that were never meant for anyone else's eyes. These moments were precious precisely because they were rare, because they existed in contrast to the scrutiny that defined much of his life. They were reminders that beyond the headlines and speculation, Harry was capable of deep, authentic connection. But even the strongest bonds are tested when external forces collide with personal vulnerability. In this case, the pressures of fame, past experiences, and the constant media glare created friction that became impossible to ignore. Sources close to Harry describe a tension that had been building, a quiet but persistent unease that each partner felt but struggled to articulate. Miscommunication, small disagreements, and the weight of public expectation began to erode the stability of the relationship. And yet, those involved remained committed to preserving the connection, fighting to maintain intimacy even as the pressures mounted. One of the most striking aspects, according to insiders, is how private Harry's pain remained. To the outside world, he was a figure often associated with resilience, confidence, and emotional composure. Yet, behind closed doors, he grappled with doubts, fears, and heartbreak. The tearful exit was a rare public display of a deeply private struggle, a moment where the emotional undercurrents could no longer be contained. It was not about spectacle, it was about humanity. And then came the pivotal conversation. "It's over." These words were not spoken lightly. They were the culmination of months, perhaps years, of emotional negotiation, miscommunication, and unspoken truths. But what did it truly mean? Was it a literal ending of the relationship, or a symbolic acknowledgement of the impossibility of sustaining private happiness under constant public scrutiny? The ambiguity is deliberate, and the very uncertainty has kept the public engrossed, the headlines spinning, and speculation at fever pitch. Friends report that this phrase, brief as it was, carried multiple layers. On one level, it reflected immediate emotional exhaustion, a recognition that a moment had reached its limit. On another, it signaled awareness of the broader consequences, the difficulty of balancing love with life in the relentless spotlight. And finally, it hinted at the internal struggle within Harry himself, a tension between the desire for privacy and the demands of public life, between vulnerability and the need to protect both himself and those he cares about. It is also important to note the role of trust. In any intimate relationship, trust is the bedrock. But when one partner is under constant scrutiny, trust becomes both more precious and more fragile. Every private conversation carries risk. Every intimate detail has the potential to leak. Friends note that Harry had grown increasingly protective of his personal life, aware that even well-intentioned disclosures could become material for headlines. And in the heat of that tension, the emotional pressure can reach a breaking point, leading to moments like the one captured outside the Montecito mansion. What makes this chapter of Harry's story so compelling is the intersection of the personal and the public. The relationship, in isolation, might have endured challenges that most couples navigate privately, but the additional weight of fame, historical scrutiny, and legacy amplified every fissure. Small disagreements were magnified, emotional missteps were interpreted as crises, and moments of vulnerability were transformed into spectacle. For Harry, the tearful exit was not just about a relationship. It was about surviving the intersection of love and public expectation, about navigating emotional truth in a world that rewards composure over authenticity. And yet, even amid the strain, there were glimpses of hope, moments where the connection seemed unbreakable. Insiders describe late-night conversations, shared laughter, and acts of kindness that reminded Harry of why the relationship mattered in the first place. It was this tension, the oscillation between closeness and conflict, hope and despair, that made the eventual breaking point so devastating and so publicly resonant. The public might see a single moment captured by cameras, a tearful exit, a whispered phrase. But the reality is far richer, far more complex. It is a story of emotional investment, of struggle, of love tested by extraordinary circumstances. And it is precisely this complexity that keeps us watching, questioning, and speculating. Because while we may never know every private detail, the patterns are clear. This was a man deeply affected by both love and the pressures that accompany his unique position in the world. And as this chapter unfolds, one critical question remains. Will the relationship survive the collision of private vulnerability and public scrutiny, or has the pressure reached a point of no return? Friends and insiders hint at discussions yet to come, decisions yet to be made, and emotional reckonings that have the potential to reshape not just Harry's personal life, but the narrative that the world has been following for decades. At first glance, the Montecito mansion seems like a sanctuary, a fortress of calm tucked away in one of California's most exclusive enclaves. White stucco walls glint in the sunlight, terraced gardens cascade with blooms in perfect symmetry, and fountains bubble gently, as if to soothe any tension in the air. But appearances, as always, can be deceiving. Behind the walls and manicured perfection, sources close to the household describe a world of quiet tension, secrets, and unspoken conflicts that no photograph could capture. This mansion, impressive as it is, has become the backdrop for some of the most intimate and revealing moments of Prince Harry's life. Walking through its halls, one can almost feel the weight of history. Every room seems to hold echoes of laughter, arguments, private conversations, and moments of introspection. Observers who have had rare glimpses inside note that the interior, while luxurious, carries a sense of deliberate calm, a balance between beauty and function. Plush furnishings, carefully curated art, and expansive windows create an atmosphere of serenity. Yet beneath this curated perfection, tension simmers like a hidden current, subtle but persistent, shaping the emotional landscape of those who live there. Sources close to Harry describe the mansion as a place of both refuge and pressure. It is a space where he can momentarily step away from the public eye, yet it also serves as a reminder of the expectations and responsibilities that follow him everywhere. Every corner, every room, tells a story, not just of luxury, but of the complex dynamics of life under scrutiny. The Master Suite, for instance, is more than a place of rest. It has been a witness to late-night conversations, moments of self-reflection, and emotional reckonings that no outsider could fully grasp. Even the kitchen, often a hub of family interaction, has been the scene of discussions about love, loyalty, and the challenges of balancing personal happiness with public expectation. The mansion's layout itself seems almost symbolic. Open, airy spaces contrast with smaller, more secluded rooms, offering both exposure and privacy. Observers note that Harry frequently used these quieter areas to retreat when the pressures of life and media scrutiny became too intense. Yet even these private spaces could not shield him completely. The very design that allows for reflection also creates vulnerability. Footsteps echo, windows expose interior life to the outside world, and every corner can become a vantage point for those seeking to capture a moment, whether for personal understanding or media consumption. The grounds are equally telling. Manicured gardens, sun-drenched terraces, and winding paths offer beauty and tranquility, yet they also serve as stages for some of the most telling moments of emotional tension. Sources suggest that Harry often walked these grounds alone, pacing, thinking, and processing complex emotions. Friends describe him as contemplative, moving with a purpose yet weighed down by internal struggles. The garden, for all its beauty, became a space for reflection and, at times, confrontation with truths he could no longer ignore. And then there are the private spaces, off-limits to outsiders, yet central to understanding the emotional landscape. Harry's personal study, for example, is described as a sanctuary of thought and planning, a place where decisions about personal life, public appearances, and relationships are considered in solitude. Here, he confronts the duality of his existence. A man striving for personal authenticity while negotiating the pressures of a global spotlight. The mansion, in this sense, is more than a home. It is a mirror reflecting the complexities of his life, a silent witness to both triumphs and struggles. What makes Montecito particularly intriguing is the contrast between its external calm and the internal turbulence. Visitors often note the immediate sense of serenity upon arrival, soft lighting, tasteful decor, a sense of order. Yet those who spend more time inside report subtle tensions, small but telling signs that all is not entirely peaceful. Closed doors, hushed voices, and moments of solitude hint at emotional currents beneath the surface. The mansion, for all its grandeur, cannot contain the human experience in full. It can only frame it. Insiders reveal that relationships within the mansion have been tested by these pressures. Emotional conversations, conflicts, and moments of revelation occur behind closed doors, where cameras cannot intrude. These private moments are the invisible threads connecting the public persona with the intimate reality, a delicate balance that Harry and those closest to him have had to navigate constantly. And it is in these threads that we begin to understand the tearful exit, the whispered words, and the emotional weight captured in those brief but unforgettable images outside. The mansion also has its own rhythms and routines, which shape the emotional atmosphere. Sources describe mornings marked by quiet reflection, afternoons punctuated by discussions with aides and confidants, and evenings often reserved for intimate moments, both joyous and challenging. It is in this ebb and flow that Harry's personal life plays out, where relationships are maintained, tensions addressed, and decisions made. Every day is a negotiation between external expectation and internal desire, a delicate choreography that few could comprehend from the outside. And yet, despite these pressures, the mansion has been a space for connection as well as tension. Friends note that shared meals, family gatherings, and quiet conversations offer glimpses of normalcy amid the extraordinary circumstances of Harry's life. These moments are fleeting, precious precisely because they are rare, and they offer insight into a man striving to maintain humanity while navigating a world defined by scrutiny and expectation. But it is impossible to ignore the shadows, the corners of the mansion where conflict, doubt, and vulnerability reside. Sources indicate that in the weeks leading up to the tearful exit, Harry spent considerable time in these spaces, wrestling with decisions about love, personal freedom, and the implications of his choices. The mansion, for all its comfort, cannot shield him from the internal battles he faces. And it is precisely in this tension between refuge and pressure that the drama of Montecito unfolds. The beauty of the mansion masks the fragility within. Each room, each hallway, and each terrace is imbued with the weight of private truths that the world rarely sees. And it is this duality, opulence and tension, calm and emotional turbulence, that makes Montecito such a compelling setting for the story of Harry's tearful exit. Here, luxury meets vulnerability, privacy intersects with scrutiny, and personal struggles are magnified by the extraordinary life he leads. As we explore the mansion further, it becomes clear that these walls have witnessed moments that go far beyond simple celebrity gossip. Late-night discussions about love, private confrontations, and decisions with global implications have all taken place within these rooms. The mansion is a silent witness to both human fragility and resilience, reflecting the contradictions that define Harry's life. And while the world sees the grandeur, the tranquility, and the perfection, the true story is unfolding quietly, in the spaces where cameras cannot reach. And yet, even within this sanctuary of luxury, a breaking point is inevitable. The mansion cannot shield him from the pressures of fame, the strain of relationships, or the emotional weight of a life lived in public view. The tearful exit was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of months of tension, reflection, and emotional struggle, much of it occurring within the very walls of Montecito. The mansion, for all its beauty, became both a refuge and a stage, a place where private decisions intersected with public consequences. The world only saw the tearful exit, the whispered words, and the flashes of paparazzi cameras. But what really happened that day, and in the days leading up to it, can only be understood through the eyes of those who know Prince Harry personally. Friends, confidants, and aides provide a rare window into the private struggles, emotional conflicts, and intimate moments that the public never witnesses. Their perspectives reveal not just the events themselves, but the human complexity behind them, the fears, the frustrations, the joys, and the heartbreaks that defined Harry's emotional landscape. Friends describe him as fiercely loyal, a man who would go to extraordinary lengths to protect those he loves. Yet they also note a vulnerability that is rarely visible in public. Harry has always carried the weight of expectation quietly, often choosing to shield his loved ones from the consequences of his own internal struggles. It's a paradox. The more visible his life becomes, the harder it is for him to show genuine emotion. Yet the more he internalizes, the greater the emotional pressure builds. Those who know him intimately say this day, The day he stepped from Montecito in tears was the inevitable tipping point of months, perhaps years, of emotional accumulation. A close friend recounts private moments that illustrate this duality. There were evenings filled with laughter, moments where Harry's charisma and warmth shone, and yet there were also nights of silence, of brooding, and of reflection. These were the nights where he grappled with decisions about love, family, and identity. Observers describe him pacing quietly through the mansion, sometimes disappearing into a private study or walking the garden paths, consumed with thought. In these moments, his vulnerability was raw, unfiltered, and intensely human, far removed from the image the public had come to associate with him. Friends also reveal the strain that relationships placed on Harry in recent months. Being in the public eye amplifies ordinary challenges. Arguments that might be private and contained for most couples can quickly become fodder for headlines, social media speculation, and public debate. Harry's friends note that he felt this pressure acutely, particularly when it came to matters of the heart. The constant scrutiny forced him to weigh every word, every action, and every expression with a level of care and calculation that is almost unimaginable to those of us living private lives. And yet, even amid this pressure, Harry remained committed to authenticity, an almost impossible goal in a world where privacy is a luxury he cannot afford. One friend provided a telling anecdote. In the days leading up to the Montecito exit, Harry had been grappling with a private conversation that left him emotionally exhausted. The details are sensitive, and names are withheld, but the gist is revealing. He had been negotiating boundaries, expressing frustrations, and confronting difficult truths. He was not angry, but deeply reflective, struggling with the balance between personal happiness and external expectations. Friends say that it was during this emotional negotiation that the seeds of that tearful moment were planted. Another confidant noted Harry's growing awareness of the public's fascination with his private life. He knows the world is watching, the friend explained. Every tear, every smile, every whispered word gets interpreted and sensationalized. And yet, he can't hide from it. It's part of who he is. He has to find a way to live authentically despite it, and that's exhausting. These insights underscore the depth of the emotional labor required to maintain a semblance of normalcy while constantly observed. Every personal decision becomes a public statement, every intimate conversation a potential headline, and navigating that landscape takes an extraordinary toll. Friends also highlight the moments of levity and humanity that the public rarely sees. Harry is described as warm, funny, and capable of deep connection. There are stories of late-night conversations filled with laughter, small acts of kindness that go unnoticed, and private rituals that provide grounding amidst the chaos of public life. These glimpses of normalcy, however fleeting, demonstrate the tension between the public persona and the private individual. It is this tension that makes the tearful exit so striking. It is the collision of the man behind the headlines with the relentless scrutiny of the world outside. Importantly, friends also shed light on Harry's resilience. Despite the emotional weight he carries, he continues to engage with those around him, to make difficult decisions, and to navigate a life that few could comprehend. They describe a man who feels deeply, who loves intensely, and who struggles with the impossibility of fully protecting his private world from the public eye. The tearful exit was not a sign of weakness, but a moment of extraordinary emotional honesty. A rare glimpse into the interior life of a man who has lived much of his existence in the glare of the spotlight. One confidant summarized it this way. People think they know him because they see him on TV or read about him online. But the truth is, they've only ever seen one layer. There's so much more beneath that surface. The fears, the frustrations, the hopes, the heartbreaks. What happened outside Montecito is just a fragment of a much larger story. This statement captures the essence of what friends are revealing. The tearful exit is a visible symptom of an invisible, deeply complex emotional reality. And yet, even as friends provide these insights, they remain cautious. Harry is intensely private, even with those closest to him. Conversations about his emotions, his struggles, and his decisions are treated with care and respect. What this means for the public is that there are layers of understanding that remain inaccessible, hidden behind trust and loyalty. Friends provide context, nuance, and perspective, but the full story, they emphasize, belongs to Harry alone. These perspectives also illuminate the broader patterns of his life. The emotional vulnerability displayed outside Montecito is consistent with his behavior over the years. A man who is deeply human, who experiences joy and pain intensely, and who navigates a life of extraordinary visibility with courage and honesty. Friends emphasize that this moment is not an aberration, but a continuation of the emotional narrative that has defined much of his life, marked by loss, love, loyalty, and the ongoing struggle to reconcile personal desire with public expectation. And here lies the tension that makes the story so compelling. The world saw a tearful exit and a few whispered words, but the reality is far more intricate. Friends' testimonies suggest that the event was the culmination of layered emotional currents, private negotiations, and long-standing pressures. It is a reminder that the human experience cannot be fully captured in a single image, a headline, or a soundbite. Harry's vulnerability is authentic, and the reactions it has elicited, from friends, the public, and the media, reflect the universal resonance of witnessing a person stripped of pretense and exposed to the world. As this chapter closes, one thing becomes clear. Friends provide both insight and intrigue. They confirm that Harry's tearful exit was not a random moment, but the result of a complex web of emotional factors, pressures, and private reckonings. And they hint at what comes next. Conversations, decisions, and revelations that could alter relationships, public perception, and the trajectory of his personal life. No story about Prince Harry can be fully understood without considering the intricate web of family dynamics that has shaped his life from the very beginning. Family, for Harry, has always been both a source of identity and a source of conflict. The bonds are deep, the expectations immense, and the pressures often unrelenting. Behind every public appearance, every carefully curated statement, and every private moment lies a lifetime of relationships that are complicated. Harry's relationship with his family has been defined by both love and trauma. From the loss of his mother at a young age to the intense scrutiny of the media, his formative years were shaped by grief, protection, and an acute awareness of public perception. Those experiences instilled in him a deep empathy, a strong sense of loyalty, and an understanding of the fragility of human relationships. Yet they also left scars. A sensitivity to judgment, a cautious approach to vulnerability, and a constant negotiation between personal desire and familial expectation. It is this duality that continues to define his relationships with family members today. Friends and insiders report that, in recent months, tensions within the family have been particularly pronounced. Conflicting priorities, differing perspectives, and the weight of legacy have created emotional friction that affects not just Harry, but everyone close to him. While he has always been committed to maintaining family bonds, the pressures of autonomy, personal growth, and the need for private space have occasionally collided with traditional expectations, creating moments of strain that are rarely visible to the public. The tearful exit, sources suggest, cannot be understood without acknowledging these dynamics. Family relationships exert a powerful influence on Harry's emotional state, shaping how he responds to stress, navigates conflict, and expresses vulnerability. Friends note that he is deeply loyal, often placing the needs and expectations of loved ones above his own. Yet there is also a limit to what one can endure, and the emotional accumulation over months, or even years, can lead to moments of release, like the one captured outside Montecito. One key element in these family dynamics is the concept of duty versus desire. Harry has always been aware of the expectations placed upon him as a member of the royal family, and he has spent his life negotiating the tension between obligation and personal fulfillment. This negotiation affects not just his public decisions, but his private relationships as well. Sources indicate that moments of tension, disagreement, and emotional conflict often arise from this ongoing struggle, particularly when the pressures of tradition clash with the demands of personal growth and authentic living. Another layer of complexity comes from the media's relentless focus on familial interactions. Every appearance, Every statement, every reported disagreement is amplified, scrutinized, and analyzed. For someone like Harry, who has grown up under such a spotlight, the public interpretation of family dynamics can feel like an additional pressure, intensifying emotional strain. Friends describe a man who is deeply affected by the way the world perceives his family relationships, aware that private disagreements can quickly become public controversies. The tearful exit was, in part, a manifestation of this cumulative pressure. A moment when the weight of expectation, scrutiny, and unresolved tension became too great to contain. Yet, despite these pressures, Harry's commitment to family remains evident. Friends emphasize that he continues to prioritize relationships, seeking connection, understanding, and reconciliation even amid conflict. The tearful exit, therefore, is not indicative of abandonment or estrangement, but rather of the emotional intensity that comes with navigating deeply rooted relationships under extraordinary circumstances. It is a human response to a uniquely challenging environment. Insiders also highlight the role of siblings and extended family in shaping Harry's emotional landscape. Support, rivalry, shared history, and divergent experiences all contribute to a complex emotional tapestry. Friends note that Harry's ability to empathize, to love deeply, and to navigate difficult conversations is informed by these familial relationships, which have provided both guidance and challenge throughout his life. The mansion in Montecito may have offered physical privacy, but the emotional and relational pressures remain inescapable, threaded into every interaction and decision. Moreover, family expectations often intersect with public perception in ways that amplify emotional strain. For Harry, maintaining dignity, loyalty, and authenticity while under global scrutiny is an ongoing challenge. Each action is examined, each statement interpreted, each emotional response critiqued. Friends describe him as constantly aware of these dynamics, balancing the desire to protect relationships with the need to assert personal boundaries. The tearful exit represents a rare, unfiltered moment in which those pressures surfaced in full view. A moment that encapsulates years of negotiation, restraint, and emotional labor. It is also important to consider the historical context. Family tensions are rarely new. They build over time, influenced by past experiences, unresolved conflicts, and the weight of legacy. Sources indicate that many of the pressures affecting Harry today can be traced to patterns established in childhood and adolescence. Patterns of expectation, loyalty, and emotional resilience that continue to influence his behavior. Understanding this context is crucial to grasping the full significance of the tearful exit and the underlying dynamics at play. Friends note that despite disagreements and emotional challenges, there is a deep foundation of love and loyalty within Harry's family. The tension is not about animosity, but about the complexity of relationships, the weight of expectation, and the challenges of balancing personal fulfillment with familial duty. The tearful exit, therefore, is a snapshot of a broader, ongoing narrative, a moment of vulnerability within a lifetime of complex relational dynamics. As this chapter unfolds, the pattern becomes clear. Harry's relationships with family are a driving force behind his emotional responses, influencing both his private decisions and public actions. The Montecito exit is not an isolated event, but a culmination of these interwoven pressures, highlighting the delicate balance between love, loyalty, expectation, and personal well-being. Friends' insights provide a nuanced understanding of the emotional forces at play, revealing why the moment captured by cameras resonated so deeply with the public. And yet, as the emotional intensity of family dynamics is revealed, one question lingers. How will these relationships evolve in the wake of such a public display of vulnerability? Friends hint at discussions yet to come, decisions yet to be made, and consequences that may reshape both personal relationships and public perception. The tension is far from resolved, and the next developments promise revelations that are as unexpected as they are impactful. For Prince Harry, the world has always been watching. From the moment of his birth, the cameras have followed, the headlines have spun, and public opinion has weighed heavily on every decision. But in recent years, that scrutiny has intensified, evolving from mere observation into a constant, almost invasive presence. The tearful exit from Montecito was not merely a private moment captured by chance. It was the inevitable intersection of personal vulnerability and relentless media pressure, a collision that amplified emotion and made private struggles unavoidable. To understand this, it's important to recognize the dual nature of media attention. On one hand, the press can elevate, celebrate, and spotlight achievements. On the other, it can distort, speculate, and sensationalize, turning ordinary moments into global narratives. Harry has experienced both. His philanthropic endeavors, military service, and public appearances are widely lauded. Yet the same media apparatus that praises can also dissect and critique, often with intensity that borders on obsession. The Montecito exit illustrates this duality perfectly. A simple act of leaving one's home becomes a headline, a story, and a global spectacle. The paparazzi are experts at capturing not just images, but emotion. They anticipate movements, predict patterns, and exploit moments of vulnerability. On the day in question, they were positioned strategically along the driveway, cameras poised, lenses focused, waiting for Harry to emerge. Sources suggest that the anticipation created an atmosphere of tension inside the mansion itself. Staff, aides, and friends were aware that the public eye was near, heightening the emotional stakes of an already charged situation. Every step Harry took was scrutinized, every gesture recorded, and every expression analyzed. The result was a moment of extraordinary exposure, private emotion rendered public in real time. Social media adds another layer of pressure. Every photograph taken by a professional is instantly shared, dissected, and interpreted by millions. Comments, theories, and speculation swirl across platforms, creating a feedback loop that can be both supportive and destructive. Sources note that Harry is acutely aware of this dynamic. He knows that private moments, once captured, become global narratives. The emotional impact is magnified not only by the presence of cameras, but by the instantaneous, viral nature of social media reaction. In this sense, media pressure is not a passive background. It is an active force that shapes emotion, behavior, and decision-making. The double-edged nature of media pressure becomes clearer when we consider its psychological effects. Experts in high-profile public figures emphasize that constant observation can exacerbate anxiety, heighten emotional sensitivity, and create a perpetual sense of being on stage. For Harry, who has lived under scrutiny for nearly his entire life, this is not a theoretical concern. It is a lived reality. Friends describe a man who is both cautious and self-aware, yet human enough to be deeply affected when private moments are thrust into public view. The tearful exit, then, is as much a response to external pressure as it is to internal emotion. Interestingly, the press itself often contributes to the tension without realizing the depth of its impact. Headlines focus on spectacle, images emphasize drama, and stories highlight crisis, but rarely do they account for nuance, context, or emotional complexity. Friends of Harry stress that the public often sees only fragments of a much larger story. A single moment, frozen in time, stripped of the layers of decision-making, reflection, and emotional negotiation that preceded it. The Montecito exit is emblematic of this pattern, a moment presented as scandalous, yet grounded in very human experience. Friends also note that Harry has developed coping strategies, albeit imperfect ones. He surrounds himself with trusted confidants, seeks moments of private reflection, and attempts to maintain emotional equilibrium despite constant observation. Yet no strategy is foolproof. The omnipresence of cameras, the immediacy of social media, and the relentless public gaze create an environment where vulnerability becomes almost impossible to conceal. Even a carefully considered step outside the mansion carries emotional and reputational consequences that extend far beyond the private sphere. And the scrutiny is not only external. Internalized awareness of public perception creates another layer of pressure. Friends note that Harry is deeply conscious of how his actions are interpreted, not just by the world at large, but by family, friends, and acquaintances. Every emotional display is calculated, yet genuine, a paradox that can intensify stress and heighten emotional response. The tearful exit is a rare moment when calculation and authenticity collided, producing a raw, unfiltered expression that captivated global attention. The consequences of this media environment extend beyond momentary headlines. Sources report that ongoing pressure has influenced decision-making, communication styles, and even relationship dynamics. In private conversations, Harry frequently expresses awareness of the tension between public image and personal reality. Friends describe discussions about the impossibility of complete privacy, the challenge of sustaining intimate relationships, and the emotional toll of living life under constant scrutiny. In this context, the Montecito moment is not a sudden outburst, but a culmination of prolonged stress and complex emotional negotiation. Even allies in the media recognize the intensity of the scrutiny. Journalists who have covered Harry for decades note that while he is a compelling public figure, his emotional depth and private struggles are often overlooked in favor of sensationalized narratives. The tearful exit, captured in a series of photographs and video clips, is a rare occasion where public documentation intersects with genuine human emotion. It is a visual shorthand for months of struggle, reflection, and internal conflict that are otherwise invisible to the world. And yet, the irony is striking. The same media that amplifies pressure also ensures global attention for personal moments, philanthropic endeavors, and public initiatives. Friends note that Harry is caught in a perpetual tension, seeking privacy while simultaneously inhabiting a world that demands visibility. The Montecito exit is a dramatic illustration of this dynamic, a private emotional event transformed into a global story almost instantly. The pattern is clear. Media pressure, social expectation, and public scrutiny act together as both catalyst and amplifier. The tearful exit is not a singular occurrence. It is the visible apex of months of tension, reflection, and emotional negotiation. Friends emphasize that understanding this context is crucial. Without acknowledging the relentless attention that defines Harry's life, the public risks reducing a deeply human moment to mere spectacle. And as this chapter closes, one thing becomes undeniable. The media's role in shaping not just public perception, but personal emotion is profound. Every photograph, every headline, every viral clip contributes to a complex emotional ecosystem in which Harry must navigate love, family, and personal identity. Friends hint at ongoing developments, decisions yet to be made, and conversations yet to unfold, stories that will continue to test resilience, reveal truths, and redefine public understanding. Behind the tearful exit, behind the whispers and the flashes of cameras, lies a layer of Harry's life that has been increasingly central to his public and private narrative: mental health. For decades, he has navigated the intersection of personal trauma, public scrutiny, and emotional vulnerability, all while attempting to live authentically in a world that rarely allows privacy. The events at Montecito cannot be fully understood without considering the mental and emotional context that has defined Harry's experiences, shaping his decisions, responses, and relationships. From a young age, Harry confronted profound loss. The death of his mother, Princess Diana, when he was just 12, left an indelible mark. Friends and psychologists alike note that such trauma has long-term effects, shaping not only grief responses, but also interpersonal relationships, self-perception, and resilience. Harry has spoken publicly about his struggles with grief, but the full emotional toll of loss in childhood, compounded by relentless media attention, is far deeper than what any headline could convey. Each emotional decision, each relationship, and each moment of vulnerability, like the one captured at Montecito, is influenced by this foundational experience. Mental health, for Harry, is both personal and relational. Friends reveal that he has long sought to understand and process his emotions, often reflecting in private or confiding in a trusted inner circle. These efforts are complicated by the public nature of his life. Every attempt at self-expression or emotional honesty carries the risk of misinterpretation. Insiders describe him as deeply self-aware, recognizing patterns of emotional response, and attempting to develop coping strategies that preserve both his personal well-being and his relationships. Yet, Even the most conscientious strategies can falter under prolonged stress, particularly when compounded by external scrutiny, family dynamics, and relationship pressures. The tearful exit can be seen as a visible manifestation of accumulated emotional strain. Sources close to Harry explain that it was not a spontaneous moment, but the result of sustained tension, unresolved stress, and the need for release. Emotional exhaustion, they report, had been building for months, influenced by both personal and relational challenges. It is this prolonged accumulation that gives the moment its intensity and resonance. The public witnessed not just a single emotional spike, but a lifetime of experiences converging in one powerful expression. Friends emphasize that Harry's struggles are not merely private. They intersect with broader social and relational realities. He has spoken openly about mental health advocacy, often emphasizing the importance of seeking help, expressing vulnerability, and confronting emotional challenges head-on. Yet, personal application of these principles is never simple, particularly when the world observes every step. The Montecito moment reflects the tension between lived experience and public expectation, a delicate balance between vulnerability and resilience, authenticity and perception. Professional insight sheds further light on the pressures Harry faces. Psychologists note that individuals under constant public scrutiny experience unique stressors, including hypervigilance, fear of judgment, and heightened emotional reactivity. For Harry, these factors intersect with the typical challenges of adult relationships, family obligations, and personal identity formation. Friends corroborate this, noting that emotional regulation is a constant task, and even small triggers can escalate into significant episodes when compounded by cumulative stress and public exposure. Insiders also report that Harry has actively sought support, utilizing therapy, counseling, and mentorship to navigate these pressures. Friends describe a man committed to understanding himself, developing strategies for emotional balance, and fostering resilience despite extraordinary circumstances. The tearful exit, therefore, is not indicative of weakness, but rather a human response to prolonged emotional demand, a natural expression of vulnerability in a context where concealment is impossible. Another factor in Harry's mental health landscape is the interplay between private relationships and public pressure. Friends note that the challenges of sustaining intimacy under global scrutiny create unique psychological strain. Negotiating personal boundaries, maintaining trust, and expressing emotion become complex tasks when the risk of exposure is ever present. The Montecito exit reflects this intersection, a moment where private emotion collided with public attention, revealing the profound weight of living life in both arenas simultaneously. The broader context of Harry's advocacy work also informs this moment. He has long sought to normalize conversations about mental health, openly discussing struggles, therapy, and emotional awareness. Friends emphasize that this advocacy is not abstract, it is deeply personal. The tearful exit represents both the reality of emotional struggle and a broader statement about human vulnerability, that even those in positions of privilege and visibility are not immune to mental health challenges. Perhaps most striking is the tension between internal resilience and external pressure.